So, a bit of backstory. As a kid, my family lived in a townhouse on a sketchy side of town. For reference, there was a drug deal going down, out in the open in the middle of the day, and people didn't seem to care that there was people coming from work and bringing their kids home from school. So, a pretty huge amount of witnesses. Being the oldest, I always try to watch out for my siblings, so I learned pretty early on how to read people. It started out simply enough at first. I knew who the worst people in the neighborhood were, so I watched how they acted and looked for those traits in other people, but by this time I was 10. It was pretty easy to pick up even the slightest red flags. This may seem pretty random, but it comes into play later. At my elementary school, the turnover was insane. It was pretty underfunded, as schools in low-income areas are, and the quality of teaching staff goes down as a result. It was so bad at one time that they had student teachers pretty much taking on classes themselves. I never minded much. I was motivated to succeed, so I was able to teach myself most things that they expected us to learn. One year, the guidance counselor quit. Nobody talked to him anyway. But then the new guy came out a week later, and I knew something was up. My number one rule when meeting a new person, to look them directly in the eye. I started doing it as soon as I started trying to read people, because I heard that thing about how the eyes are the windows to the soul, and wondered if there was anything to it. They started bringing him around to the classrooms and introduced him to the teachers and students, that everyone knew who to talk to if they were having troubles at home or anything of the sort. They brought him into my class, and we were lining up to go to PE, so I had a clear view of the door when he walked in with one of the office staff. I looked him directly in his face, like I did for everyone, and his eyes were different than any I'd ever seen. It was like looking into a shark's eyes. There was just nothing there at all. I'd seen deception, anger, sadness, and many other emotions in other people's eyes, but never nothing at all. Over the next couple of months, they had him going around to the classes every now and again, so he could gain our trust or whatever, and he was an odd guy. He was always fidgeting, couldn't meet the teacher's eye, or tried to avoid any sort of conversation with any authority figure. He avoided our principal like the plague, but when he was talking to us students, it was like he had laser-focused, direct eye contact, maintaining command of the conversation, and giving hugs every so often to show support, or something along those lines. I also noticed that he had a gray patch in his hair that was shaped like a train, which I thought was the dumbest thing I'd ever seen. Like, he'd use a stencil with hair dye. It was really odd. I was intrigued because it was rare for me not to be able to read people at this point, so I watched him closely whenever he was around. One day, it kind of just clicked when he was in my classroom. He was hugging one of the girls exclusively and talked to them differently as well. Nervous around authority, and when he responded to questions, it was almost like they were prefabricated responses, and if he didn't have one ready, he changed the subject. I told my mom when I got home that I thought this guy was a creeper, but she just kind of waved it off because counselors should be comfortable around people they counsel. A very valid point, and I just accepted it. One day, I got one of my fingernails ripped off playing basketball. We played rough, and I fell and slid across concrete. While I was in the nurse's office getting cleaned up, this dude comes in and sits down on the seat next to me, which was comical because there were those extra small seats made for kids. He threw his arm around my shoulder and started asking where my kid's sister had been the past few days. A few things about me. I don't like being touched, even by family. I didn't and don't give out information about siblings. And I have a short temper that was already set off because I was in pain. I kind of shoved him away and told him not to worry about my sister. She had the flu or something, so she hadn't been at school for a couple days. Nobody expected this out of me. I was quiet and polite normally, so he kind of backed off and gave me my space from then on. One day, this guy just stopped showing up to work. Nobody knew why. They scrambled for another guidance counselor after a while and eventually found one, but I got my moment eventually. Turns out, someone at the district or something started poking around in the records, and he bolted when he found out. In the end, they sent out a notice that he was one of those sketchy priests that got picked up for unsavory things in his ministry or whatever. He wasn't even supposed to work around kids at all, but just slipped through the cracks somehow. I normally would have been strutting around telling the people that I had guessed it, but it was just the sickest feeling ever. This guy was asking about my sister, and I had luckily been telling my kid siblings to watch out for him, or who knows what could have happened. If you're somehow reading this, dude, I was onto you from the beginning. Let's not meet again. The trains in my city are unexpected. Don't know what to expect at any time in the train. I've gotten used to this weird, interesting world we live in. Let's take a dive into this train and have a seat with me. I was headed to work very early, and I had a shift at 8 a.m. Doing my routine, putting my noise-canceling headphones on just to vibe hard. Nothing sketchy, and I felt pretty good until mid through the ride. I heard yelling from across the train, and didn't think much of it, like any other day. The yelling was louder, and I thought I accidentally pressed ambient mode. I was staring at the floor because honestly, I didn't know what to look at or do. Yelling was even louder. I looked up and saw this woman without her mask. Almost shit in my pants. But she tried kicking my face, missed, and left a scuff on my black sweatpants. I moved away terrified. The woman began to throw clothes onto the floor. I looked around and the passengers were smiling at me. Very weird. I currently take an alternative route transient bus now, and it's pretty safe. However, it is a very long ride. I wish I had a car, but currently too nervous. In October of 2019, I went to a Halloween costume ball hosted at our local art gallery, which was organized by a Unitarian Universalist Spiritual Center, whose members I have close ties with. It was a typical party, but had a few ceremonial attributes to celebrate Samhain. I dressed up as a Red Death from Phantom of the Opera, basically went alone, thus waiting for a friend who did eventually come to meet up with me later in the night. Before that, I've had the bizarre experience. Bizarre as in, I was unable to imagine a clear explanation behind this circumstance. I still can't think of one to this day. So after dancing to the music and sipping a couple of drinks, I was interested enough to purchase a photographic aura reading from this lady at a little booth. I sat down and she instructed me to take off my skull mask and firmly lie my palms on a flat silver machine linked to her laptop. I was then instructed to look into a camera, and after a few minutes my image appeared on the screen with a mix of transparent colors and various measuring charts. I was further intrigued and listened to the lady's explanations concerning chakras and the like. As I was trying to pay attention to her, something in my peripheral vision distracted me a bit. I decided to look directly ahead, and to my surprise, a group of 4 sitting at a table was staring and smiling back at me. 3 men and 1 woman. If their expressions weren't friendly, then they were most definitely flirtatious. I can't recall if they ever blinked. I was a bit weirded out, especially since I wasn't wearing my skull mask, and I didn't even think to wave back a hello. So I just ignored them and listened further to the lady's interesting lecture, helping me examine my aura. At the same time, I couldn't help I couldn't help but feel being stared down from the distance. I looked ahead again, and it was the same group checking me out. They just kept looking at me without even signaling me to walk over to the table. I knew I wasn't hallucinating, because I blinked and the group was still there, not making a single move. To be honest, I swear I never met this group before. I really don't know why they were staring at me like they already knew me closely. While not making it a big deal, the lady finished up. I paid her, and just got up to go to the restroom. I just brushed off that stranger experience as nothing. Afterward, my friend found me, and we just chatted until we had to leave for his mother's birthday outing. Interestingly enough, I then realized that the group never approached me after my aura session. I wonder what that was all about. Out of stubborn curiosity, I searched through the entire venue and still didn't find them. Good thing I didn't have to tell a man that I had teeth inside my rear end to scare him off. Well, that's pretty much it, and hopefully you are never as spooked as I was. I love gothic horrors, as such as anyone. I had said to my friend Karen. That is when the crowned stranger made glaring eye contact with me. I shied away. I don't like making eye contact with people like that. Let's get going. I want to go home. Okay, Kevin. Karen took my arm and we left the mall as it began to snow lightly in the twilight of the winter's dusk. All the way home, we smooched and sang Christmas carols loudly like idiots. Walking, the crowned stranger was following us the whole way. We got home, made love, ate dinner, exchanged gifts, and went to bed. The crowned stranger watched all of this from some shaded place. I know not where. I awoke to the crowned stranger's voice inside my head. Everything seemed strange. I felt like I was looking at myself through the eyes of someone else. I became very disoriented, and I stood, or rather erected, on the edge of my bed, in a mere instant through no effort of my own. The crowned stranger was felt like a presence, and I know it wanted me to come to it. It was calling me, I knew not why. I was walking down the stairs inside my home, but these stairs were not my stairs. It is very difficult to explain how such a thing is. It must be seen. It is like if the whole world were just the staircase in the dark, but you can see your stairs when you close your eyes. It is like walking down them, not indistinktly, but in some kind of singular perception. And then there is reflection when you open your eyes. Those same stairs are being watched by you as you descend them, and then you reach the landing. I had become so disoriented at the time that it became difficult to comprehend my own home. It was like as though everything were artificial. Nothing was from the earth, not even myself. And I could see myself standing there in my living room, observing myself. It was not easy to realize what I was looking at. And then I noticed a mirror. I saw then the crowned stranger. This being held a knife for me and suggested that I should just kill myself. I said no, and I dropped the knife. I can still see it shattering like glass, the option gone. I apparently had made some kind of wish or decided something fateful, blindly, unfairly. If I could go back to that moment, I would. I stepped over the broken knife and began to strangle the intruder with my bare hands. When he fell to his knees, I kept strangling him. When he fell to the carpet, I did not relent. When he tapped my arm, begging for mercy, I still held. And when he stopped, I was still holding. And when I was sure he was dead, I finally let go. Then I saw that he was me. I looked again at the mirror and saw that I was actually the crowned stranger. Somehow I had just killed my own body, and now I was in his. I had to get back inside of me. I dragged my body back to the kitchen and began to search for a way to get it out. I used a meat tenderizer to break open the skull with repeatedly heavier blows, resenting the destruction of my own face. Finally, I had opened up the skull and started getting my brains out. I wondered if I should microwave them first for some reason, but revolted at the idea of damaging my own brain in a microwave oven, so I just ate them raw. It occurred to me that I was going to need something to keep me from getting anxious while I waited to get that to digest. So I wished for music, and there it was, the music. The whole house lit up with a beautiful, bright light. The music started playing, and I danced until I had struck every object from its perch. My ragged clothing swayed, and I donned one of the masks on the floor, on the wall. The white mask over my dark tan, the balloon mask with purple flowers and feathers. I went upstairs to see the gloves that would go good with it. A pair of Karen's nice white gloves. Well, I looked over and saw her watching me with great terror. I tried to tell her who I was. She saw the blood and didn't believe me. She was so scared, and her action kept shifting, like she was speaking in tongues, flailing, crying, then just staring. I just stood there. I don't know why I was feeding off her fear. I didn't actually like seeing it, but at the same time, the sensational was undeniably good. Then I decided I could get more of myself in myself now that I had the brain. I went back downstairs. That is when they shot me down. Several loud gunshots took me. There was a brief moment where they killed me, I think. But I didn't convince them I was okay guy or that I was me. I just saw the blood-soaked crowned stranger. So I stood there then holding the same gun that had just killed me. I was trembling because I had never held a gun before. But with moments, my hand steadied itself. I could suddenly remember my own mother's face. Out of nowhere, my mind cleared and I realized I was standing beside the crowned stranger in some cathedral, looking out through the eyes of the same cop that had just killed me. The crowned stranger turned and looked at me and smiled. His face was blank, but he smiled. "It is just a feeling in the cathedral of the crowned stranger," I asked. "What is happening?" And the crowned stranger told me that this was entirely my own fault. We were the cop that ended up staying. The crowned stranger could make anyone do anything. It seemed simply by asking nicely. This is how the crowned stranger seduced Karen. I was quite horrified at first, but then I remembered, in some shock haze, some of the events that had led me to that moment. I looked instead of the crowned stranger and saw the shadows on the wall. I thought that would be my best chance to try and stop the crowned stranger. So I had strangled my beloved to death. She actually fought back, though, and managed to use one of my pins to open up the neck of the crowned stranger. I continued to strangle her to death so that the crowned stranger could not keep her. And then I fell down dead next to her. The cathedral began to crumble into chunks and dust. I looked below the cathedral and beheld a splendid city with streets filled with revelers. The streets from above were like staircases. The skies were a true night, a reflection without stars. And as it all shattered and broke apart, I watched and I laughed and panicked to strangers as they fled and fell into open cracks. I walked alongside them and now laughed at them as they died. They were all crowned strangers in their ballroom masks and gloves and dresses. I went along them, ragged and yawned, laughing at them, and my laughter could explode them into the next city. Then it all fell silent, and I left alone in that place. I spoke in tongues into the darkness, my eyes unseen, but I knew my own reflection finally, and it wasn't the crowned stranger. For that I'm thankful. A few years ago, my sister and I were at the park near our house. Our neighborhood was super safe, by the way. I was probably 10 to 11, and she must have had been 8 or 9. Maybe we're a bit younger. Anyways, we were just hanging out, playing with a ball, and this car pulled up, and this old guy got out. We had no idea who he was, and nobody else was at the park. It was super weird. Then he started talking to us. It was hella weird. He started saying some things like, I did that when I was a kid. Weird, right? Then he said some other stuff that I don't remember, but yeah. Then a few minutes later, I was like, I have to go. Then he went back to his car and drove away. My sister and I stayed for a few more minutes. What were we thinking? Eventually we walked until he drove past again. This was a bit later. Anyways, we both promised to never tell our parents. We never did. I think about that every few months. And thinking back, we should have called the police at the time. We didn't have phones. I mean, he could have just been friendly. But why would he stop at a random small park and start stalking kids?